My name's Kerry, and today I'm going to talk about choosing a practice rapier for historical European martial arts, also called HEMA, usage. Now, there's a couple things to consider when it comes to rapier fencing. And it talks about the type of rapier fencing that you're going to do. The most common rapier type of fencing, I think here in the United States, is actually what's referred to as SCA, Society for Creative Anachronism, type of cut and thrust fencing. And that basically, make a demonstration here. It's really more, it has some aspects, of rapier fencing, but a lot of it is like, really more of a saber type of fencing. It involves a lot of slashes. There's a couple reasons for that, from my understanding. Originally, it started out, they were using rattan sticks, much like other types of SCA fighting, using rattan sticks, and they're round wooden sticks, basically. And they were, basically emulating a lot of things from that type of fighting. Also, stage choreography, stage fencing, if you will, the type of theatrical fencing that's done in movies like The Princess Bride, or pretty much any Three Musketeers movie, that stuff all comes from modern fencing, which is the three weapons type of fencing, which includes small sword, and saber fencing, basically. So they're basically combining small sword, which is a very different type of weapon than a rapier, and a saber fencing, which again is a very different type of weapon. But because the foils, the practice swords that are used for both types of fences, foil, EP, all that stuff, sabers, they basically all kind of look very similar. They're very thin, okay? And even though they're used differently, they look very similar. So unless you're really paying attention to like the history of fencing and different types of swords and how this stuff all came about, it all kind of blends together for the average person. Unfortunately, that's what's kind of happened with theatrical fencing. You have people that are using a mixture of small sword and saber techniques to do rapier fencing on screen. So the popular viewpoint from media has been that's what rapier fencing is, even though rapier fencing is completely different. Like actual historical rapier fencing, totally different. Of course, there's different styles, but the basic premise is the same. You are using your weapon, your blade, to protect you against the opponent, which means it has to basically be out pretty much all the time. You don't do things like this, okay, that gets you killed. You are also using a complicated hilt, I should say, complicated guard. Any type of sword guard that has more than just a crossbar, basically, is considered to be a complex hilt. This type here is a swept hilt rapier. It comes off of what was called, or what we call today, I should say, a side sword. This type is really designed to do two things. One, it's designed to protect against cuts from other types of weapons, such as a side sword or a long sword. It is also designed so that when your opponent tries to thrust you, there is a deflection of their blade with the hilt that moves it ideally away from your own body. You can also use the crossbar a little bit, the crossbar, to sort of move the weapon away from your body as well to help guide it. So that's what the general functions of these features on the hilt are for. Now, of course, there's different types. This is a swept hilt rapier guard. This is a Pappenheimer guard. And of course, I also have the third type, which is a cup hilted rapier guard as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about the features of these different type of guards and what resulted in them being developed. But before I even talk about that, I want to make sure that you're using the correct type of blade. This is called a Schläger blade, I think is the proper way to pronounce it. I don't know, it's a German word again. It basically has a diamond cross-sectional blade that is designed to somewhat emulate an actual rapier blade. It has a blunted blade, so you can't actually cut anybody with it, even though this type of movement isn't really something that you do in rapier fencing normally. I mean, you can cut with a rapier, of course, an actual rapier, if the blade is sharpened, but that's not really how it's used. Most of the cuts are actually small things they would be more of what's called a pull cut, where you're pulling it back toward yourself a little bit. Or if you're thrusting, you can also cut people while you are basically doing a thrusting type of move. Most of the attacks for rapier is actually the thrust is the primary means of striking your opponent. This is better because when you have the blade in front of yourself, you're able to use the blade, I should say, to protect yourself. You're not really using the cross guard to protect yourself. Cross guard is more of a last resort, which is why you can have all these large gaps in a swept hilt rapier, because this is not actually what you're supposed to be using to protect your hand. But there are people that want more protection for their hand, and that's where the other types of guards come in. Now, other type of blade that you can find that's used within SCA is an EP blade, foil blades basically. Those type of blades people will use on their rapiers. They are really not a rapier blade. They are a small sword blade simulator. They weigh a lot less. They just don't have necessarily the right properties for emulating actual historically accurate rapier fencing, which is why the slender type has come about. These do bend in the thrust, which an actual real rapier would not do. They would be normally stiffer because you want to have maximizing your thrust capabilities, and a stiffer blade helps you do that. That doesn't mean that they have absolutely no flex whatsoever. Some of them did have some flex. Some of them were basically just an ice pick, okay? You got a wide variety of different types of rapiers, and the best rapiers, I think the ones that were actually for fighting with, they did have a couple common characteristics. Common characteristics being a sharpened blade, very much a triangular shaped tip so that they could easily penetrate the opponent when they were thrusting. They would generally have a type of balance so that you can basically take your fingers completely off of the guard here. If I can get my hands out of there. Completely get your hands off of it, and you still are able to support the weight of it. The reason being because the design of it, the way that it's able to be leveraged. Most of the opposing force is actually being put into the palm of your hand, and that just makes it a lot easier to do very small movements, which is what you do for rapier fencing. It's not a lot of this, okay? It's a lot of this and this, trying to gain the advantages against your opponent using mechanical leverage, mechanical strength of the weapon as a lever. So the weight of the blade is going against the weight of the opponent's blade, ideally to push it down using proper leverage. So they basically, if you had locking blades here, this was my opponent over here, this is me over here, and I have my blade on top of them, it's very easy for me to push down upon them, and they can't really push up, because trying to go up is against your own body mechanics for the way that your wrist and your arm is designed to work. It's way harder. Think of it in terms of if you were lifting dumbbells, okay? Just stick your arm out like this, right? You're trying to just lift the dumbbells like this versus doing it like this, okay? It's way harder to do it this way than it is to do it this way. And that's, the same mechanics here at work. Your arm is designed to go this way. It's not really designed to go like that, okay? So if you can get that person into a position with their wrist where their weaker muscles are trying to fight against your stronger muscles, that's the advantages you're really getting in rapier fencing. It's kind of a convoluted way to explain it. There's better ways to explain it. You can watch actual rapier fencing videos if you want. I'm just talking about the reasons why you're trying to gain a mechanical leverage. Your arm is part of the mechanical machine, if you will, alongside your blade when you are rapier fencing. So the weight of the blade needs to sit upon the opponent's blade to gain advantages, a mechanical advantage over that opponent. That's what rapier fencing is actually really about. It's very complicated chess, even more so than I would say lawn sword fencing is. And it's fairly physically demanding. You're keeping your blade in front of you in some type of guard, okay? Some type of guard position in front of you. Otherwise, you're not protected. You've got to adopt very complicated, complex, type of body positions, which can be very physically demanding on your lower and upper body. It's way more physically exhausting to be a rapier fencer than a lawn sword fencer, because we can really just sort of shift our weight down into, you know, a stance that's very comfortable for us. Rapier fencing has a lot of lunging into weird body positions so that your head and your chest is far enough back away from the opponent's blade, because they're going to be doing the same thing to you at the same time. So you want to keep, you know, as few targets available as possible and use your blade to be able to protect you. It's very fun, I think. I originally, when I was getting into HEMA, I didn't think rapier fencing was going to be something I was into, but it turns out it was actually a lot of fun, so I got into it. Anyway, the slender type of blades are only manufactured by some manufacturers of historical fencing rapiers. So you can't just go to like you know, wholesale-swords.com and easily find one of these. The cheapest, most affordable sword you could get from one of those manufacturers is the Hanwei Practical Rapier, Practical Swept Hilt Rapier. Comes in 2 different sizes. The sizes is kind of irrelevant. If you're a shorter person, maybe you have the shorter one. If you're a taller person, maybe you get the longer one. Doesn't really matter. Rapier blades came in many different lengths, some that were very long, very ridiculously oversized. I don't think they were actually practical, those very large ones. I think that those were more of a symbol of wealth and status, and of course the craftsmanship of the swordsmith. Nevertheless, generally speaking, these are about the sizes that is most appropriate for historical rapier fencing as practiced today within the HEMA sports, you know, global international groups, the alliances and organizations. So you've got this Hanwei, probably the most affordable that's on the market. There are some shortcuts. It is using a swept hilt rapier, which doesn't provide you the most hand protection. But as I mentioned before, you don't really need a lot of hand protection, honestly, for these. But if getting thrusted in the hand when somebody is you know, being too aggressive, if that's a concern for you, then you definitely might want to have more protection of the hands. This is a good starter one, I think. The replacement blades are very cheap and affordable and common. Hanwei is always making these. These are probably the better ones for beginners, or if you're going to get like a bunch of loaners for your club. This is a very good entry-level rapier for learning fencing. Now, the next type that we have is a cup hilted rapier. This one is made by VP, who is a European smith. They're imported here into the United States through Purpleheart Armory. It is a cup hilted rapier, but it still has the crossbars, of course. Now, cup hilts are the next sort of evolution, if you will, in rapier design and complicated hilt design for swords back in the Renaissance period. Obviously, it provides a lot more protection for your hands. Of course, it does add a little bit more weight because there is more of the weight in forward position toward the blade, whereas with a complicated hilt, it probably has about the same amount of metal, but the weight has been distributed in different ways. So these thick bars can protect you on the side of your hands against cuts, because, you know, back in the day, people didn't have, you know, just rapier versus rapier fighting, okay? People would use a rapier to fight against everything from a knife to even a pole arm. So you had to have a guard that was designed to protect you from many types of weapons. Cup hilts are really, you know, when we start seeing more of a priority, rapiers are now becoming very popular. So people fighting against other rapiers is becoming more commonplace. So there's a bit more of a priority now focused on protecting against just those types of attacks from another rapier or a side sword somebody is using like a rapier. In terms of flex, of course, this VB one has a flex as well. It's a very good flex, I think, for thrusting in a way that is very safe when you're wearing appropriate jackets and fencing masks and things of that nature. I have it capped here. It's been capped with a the blunting for a chair, and basically people also put arrow blunts and things on there as well. I'm not a huge fan of this particular model of cup hilt. I'm just going to say it. It's a little bit more expensive than the Hanwei, and it is way, way heavier. It's not heavier just because the cup is very thick. I think it's probably too thick, personally. Personally, I think the cup hilt is too thick, but that's not really the main problem. I think the blade itself is just a little too heavy, and the thickness of the crossbars also is probably more thick than it really needs to be. It could be just a smidge thinner, I think. But why is this so heavy? Why is it so thick? Well, again, like I said, there's people that also study in the SCA, the cut and thrust, so they do like smash, they smash their rapier blades against each other in what's basically saber fencing, okay? So this has really been designed and weighted in such a way that it would make a really great, you know, maybe not a great straight saber. That's actually not accurate, but that's basically how it's been designed. And I don't like it. It's just so much heavier. It's just way heavier. I use this, I used this one time. I took it with me as the only rapier I brought with me to a seminar, and I was using it for like 4 hours a day for like 4 days or something. And I had a terrible, terrible case of tennis elbow, and my wrist was just really hurting. It was hard. It was hard to keep it up compared to if I had just been using one of these Hanwei type of ones, which wouldn't have been anywhere near. So I know I'm criticizing a manufacturer of goods, but the truth is, like, I think it's way too heavy. I think this needs to be a lot lighter. Reduce the amount of material, and it will be a lot easier. Now, of course, you can use a 2-finger. Probably can't even see that. There's the 1-finger type of grip for a rapier, and then there's the 2-finger type. 2-finger type you're using if you know, you're having a really hard time doing the 1-finger type. 1-finger type is better, gives you a little bit more control, okay? But 2 fingers, you know, I guess it doesn't really matter, but just your preference. You definitely have to use 2 fingers with this one. It's just too heavy, and you know, I'm just not a fan of it. I think that it would be much better if it just reduced the material. Third type of rapier hilting, we have the Purpleheart type of guard. This is basically the best of both the swept hilt and the cup hilt. It is basically a cup hilt rapier that has had material removed from the inside of it to greatly reduce the weight. It has, you know, neat, you know, graphics, usually some types of designs to make those, you know, reductions of the weight look kind of cool. This rapier has been manufactured by Castille Armory. It has, you know, the slender type of bending blade, and it weighs a lot less. It's a lot more comfortable to hold than the VB is. It is a lot more expensive. I had this made to order, and it's got a very nice grip. Did a really great job on it, but it was way more expensive. I purchased it with this this main gauge that I had them create. So, you know, when you're fencing, you know, you have your main gauge here, and it's just as a set. I think it's cost me like over $1,000, but it's, you know, it's very beautiful and it's really comfortable to use. I really enjoy having it. Now, another thing to consider is when somebody is making a guard, are they making a guard that is going to be able to allow you to use protective equipment? Most people just use like a regular padded leather glove, but some people want additional protection, and there are manufacturers. This is by Gargiadoni, a European manufacturer of some HEMA goods. I bought this protected glove. It's basically, you know, has a design similar to a motorcycle glove, but it has some hard plastic protection in the hands and the fingers, and even the side of the hand, which makes it really ideal for when you're rapier fencing. It's very comfortable to use and so forth like that. But, you know, you can also just use like regular padded gloves. A lot of people do that. I just bought this because it seemed like it was really cool and less likely to ever, you know, get my hand broken if I'm using this, because sometimes people can have accidents and get their hands broken while they are rapier fencing. But it's an important consideration. Can you get your hand in, because there are some people who manufacture hilts for rapiers that may not really understand the purpose of the different parts of the rapier guard, the rapier itself, how it needs to be constructed in a way that's very functional. So they might make a guard that is way too small, and you can't even get a gloved hand in there. So just keep that in mind. I don't really have anything more to say for choosing a rapier as a beginner. I think this basically covers everything that's important to think about and consider. There are of course many more manufacturers than just these. I'm just using these three as examples because they are the three different types of guards that are most commonly used by people. It is a swept hilt rapier, cup hilted rapier, or a Pappenheimer style of guard. That basically covers everything that a beginner, I think, needs to really know about choosing a practice rapier. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below. If you liked it, any further comments, anything you want to correct me on, let me know. And hope that you got something out of this. Thank you.